In 1931, Universal Pictures was riding high off the success of their breakout horror talkie, Dracula. Dracula was a bit of a transitionary film, as they were still learning how to make movies with sound work, and in a lot of ways it owed a lot to the silent era. Frankenstein was a bit more evolved, and in that way, a better film. It's the first feature-length film based on Frankenstein, but even though it's much longer than the previous adaptation, it still only adapts a small part of the novel. Gone are the beginning and ending frames of the story involving the Arctic Circle and the creation of the bride, though elements of these sections would show up in the sequels. The film also oddly changes the name of the main character from Victor Frankenstein to Henry Frankenstein. I don't see why it matters or why they'd want to change it, and strangely enough, his best friend is named Victor. Anyway, Frankenstein was kind of a big deal when it came out. It starred the soon-to-be legendary Boris Karloff as the creature, and the film would launch him into horror film superstardom. He would be one of the most recognizable and well-paid actors of the time, continuing to appear as the creature in several more films, as well as starring in other horror classics such as The Man They Could Not Hang and The Mummy. Interestingly, the role of the creature was originally offered to Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula, but he didn't find the role to be interesting, though he appeared as Igor in the third film, The Son of Frankenstein. The makeup and special effects were revolutionary for the time, and to not spoil the look of the creature, Karloff had to walk around the studio with a sheet over his head when he was in full makeup, and also to protect his identity, as it was kept a secret that he was in the movie. And then no one can speculate what the creature might look like. In the opening credits, there's a question mark where his name should be, though he's credited at the end of the film. There are some fundamental changes from the novel's tone. In the novel, Frankenstein is a bright-eyed and ambitious student who happens on a way to create life. And though it becomes an obsession, he didn't really do anything evil to attempt his goals. Frankenstein in this film is a total asshole. He's engaged to be married, but instead of dealing with that, he locks himself away in an abandoned watchtower working on his experiments, and his fiancée hasn't even heard from him for 4 months. Talk about patient on her part. His sole confidant is his assistant, Fritz, who started the trend of Frankenstein having deranged, hunchback assistants. Fritz is cowardly and cruel and not quite sane, and is played excellently by Dwight Frye, fresh off of his role as Renfield in Dracula. Frankenstein and Fritz resort to outright grave robbing to obtain body parts to create the creature's body, and when Fritz goes to steal a brain from a nearby medical college, the numb fucker drops the jar. He winds up taking a second brain, that of a deranged criminal. Frankenstein's best friend, old teacher, and girlfriend show up to try to talk some sense into him, but he goes ahead with his experiment anyway, giving the creature life. However impressed everyone is by it, they're worried about the creature's violent and monstrous nature. Frankenstein reasons that he's only a few days old and is learning to be alive, but it doesn't help that Fritz tortures him with whips and torches, leading to the creature to eventually murder Fritz and go on a rampage. Bad timing, as Frankenstein's dad shows up to get his son to stop fiddle-fucking around and get married already. They manage to subdue the monster by knocking it out with chemicals, and the professor stays behind, promising to humanely euthanize the creature, but for whatever reason, he doesn't do that, and instead he tries to vivisect it. The creature had a higher resistance to the knockout chemicals than he thought, and comes back to life, murdering him and then escaping. The creature comes across a young girl and her cat next. The cat just kind of disappears between shots, I don't know. This is a very interesting scene, as for the first time the creature is faced with someone who doesn't fear him. She brings out sort of a childlike innocence in him, and they play with flowers and toss them into a nearby lake. But after running out of flowers, the confused creature tosses her into the lake. Personally, I think she should have been okay, as he didn't exactly toss her far, but she winds up drowning. Meanwhile, Frankenstein is just about ready to get married, and his father, the Baron, has the whole town celebrating by getting drunk. His fiancée, Elizabeth, seems to know some bad shit is going down. Women's intuition, I guess, and Frankenstein acts like an asshole as usual and locks her in a room when the creature shows up. It terrorizes her to the point where she's nearly catatonic. The poor dead little girl's father shows up and everybody goes into a frenzy trying to find the murderer. This leads to the famous torch and pitchfork scene. Now, one thing that is interesting to note is that a lot of people who haven't seen the film, or forget the details, they think that they're chasing the monster because he's different or frightening or whatever, but In fact, they're all unaware that he's a monster at all. They think they're just looking for a child killer. The dumbass villagers, who are probably still half drunk from the wedding party, get separated from Frankenstein, despite him yelling at them which way to go, and the creature gets the drop on him and carries him off to an old windmill. He tosses his creator over the side, sort of reminds me of the Hunchback of Notre Dame in a way. And while Frankenstein survives, the villagers burn the windmill down, presumably destroying the creature with it, though he would show up for several sequels. The movie is one of the best of the Golden Age Universal horror pictures. It's dark, stylish, and creepy, but with just enough of a human touch to keep it grounded. I particularly liked Baron Frankenstein. He's quite a funny character, and the creature's rampage being intersped with the drunken wedding party is a nice touch. There's great performances, but the best of which are Boris Karloff himself and Dwight Fry as Fritz. A lot of people who have seen this movie a long time ago, they tend to forget exactly how good it was, and I have to remind you how good it was, and I have to recommend you watching it again. Strangely, the sequels would actually wind up being even better, with The Bride of Frankenstein being known for its excellent plot, and The Son of Frankenstein being known for a standout performance by Bela Lugosi. Karloff would then step down after that, letting others play the creature, though he returned once more for House of Frankenstein. Though it's usually eclipsed by its sequels, there's a lot in the film that has become public bromide, like the experiment using lightning, the creature's strange childlike innocence, and the archetype of the hunchback lab assistant. Frankenstein is a classic in every way, and I give it a 9 out of a possible 10.